Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Now, today we've got a very special guest that we were glad to have come on the show. I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and we were able to line this out because he's a very busy guy. You might recognize him by the ABC show that just aired a few weeks ago, which centered around Sammy the Bull. What was it? Truth and Lies, The Last Gangster. That was the name of it.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Please welcome to Crime and Entertainment, Anthony Ruggiano Jr., former Gambino associate. How you doing, pal?
I'm doing good. How are you? How's everything going?
It's going good. It's going good. This Saturday morning here. How's the weather where you are?
Oh, it's beautiful. Matter of fact, after you and I are finished, I'm headed up to the beach.
All right. Yeah.
Very nice.
Anytime that's your destination, I guess the weather's doing pretty good.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, to get into your story, I feel as though we have to talk a little bit about your father first, to get on to you, because your father is what, you and I have spoke before. Your father is what I consider to be a gangster's gangster, especially around the New York area. You got guys' names that just solidify what being a gangster was. And, Neil Dellacroce, Carlo Gambino, and your father, Fat Andy, fits right into that mold. He was a tough customer. Tell us a little bit about, your father and growing up as Fat Andy's son and how he became involved in this life.
Well, I have to go back to his early childhood because his father, my grandfather, passed away when my father was only 6 years old in 1932. And at that time in East New York, there was a lot of mob guys in East New York. When my father was a kid, Murder Inc. was involved in there, Happy Mayoni. And it just so happened that his friends, his childhood friends, their fathers and uncles were all mobbed up. So he was in and out of their houses at an early age. So he was around that type of character at a very early age, and he had no father. So that was very impressionable. They took him under their wing, and sort of they became his father figures. So as growing up, then he started getting in trouble in his neighborhood. He got drafted during the war, but he went AWOL. He went to Leavenworth for a few years. So he was kind of a little bit of a wild kid. And then when he got out of Leavenworth, he was only home for 6 months. And then he got rearrested again. And he went back to Sing Sing. And in Sing Sing, there was a couple of wise guys there. Christy Ticker, who later on became the underboss of the Casey family. And they took a liking to him. They pulled him into the bakery. And, he worked with them in the bakery back in Sing Sing. But when he got out of Sing Sing, he was still young. He was in his very, very early 20s. And he hooked up with his partner, Tony Lee. And they started robbing poker games in Brooklyn and Queens. And they robbed this wise guy's poker game called Charlie Wagons. And he reached out to Albert Mayoni, who was Happy Mayoni's brother of Murder Inc., and asked him if he knew who this kid Andy was. And he said, yeah, he's Frank Liberty's kid brother. That was my Uncle Frank. Was my father's older brother. And he said, could you get the money back? And he goes, no. He said, there's only two things you could do with this kid. Either you could kill him or give him a job. He's not going to listen. He's not going to give you the money back. He's not going to stop. So Charlie asked Albert to bring him to meet. And Charlie was a soldier at the time with the Mangano family, who later on became the Gambino family. And Albert Anastasia was the boss of that family at the time. It was in the 50s, in the like 1950. And so Albert Mayoni brought my father to Charlie. And it so happened Charlie took a liking to him and actually gave him a job, as my father became Charlie's driver. And then the story goes from my father that after a while of my father driving Charlie around, Charlie took my father outside one day and asked him if they asked him to kill somebody, would he do it without asking any questions? And he said, yeah. And my father said later on, they picked him up. He still lived with my grandmother because he just hadn't met my mother, but he still lived with my grandmother. And they picked him up at my grandmother's house. And he got in the car with Charlie and another guy. And then he told me that he whispered in the guy's ear. And I didn't know what he meant at first. I said, what do you mean you whispered in the guy's ear? And he went like this with his finger, like he shot him in the head. And that was the first time he did anything like that for the mob. And then, then he started doing more of them. And then Albert Anastasia took a liking to him. Albert Anastasia started calling him the Kid. That was like a pet name for him. So now you had this Albert Anastasia, who was nickname was the High Executioner because he was the boss of Murder Inc. So my father started doing work for that family. And then in 1953, the books were closed because when the books are open, you could become maid, but sometimes there's special cases and they make you when the books are closed. And in 1953, my father was 26, had just turned 26 years old, and Albert Anastasia straightened him out as a special case. And there was a little bit of a beef at the time. The Genovese family, this guy, Tony the Sheik, he put in a little bit of a beef against my father because my father actually robbed his poker game at the same time he robbed Charlie's. So you know, your name goes around when you get proposed, your name goes around and each family has an opportunity to say something. So they put in a little bit of a stink and they had to sit down in Manhattan. And the story goes through my father that Albert Anastasia was there, and Tony the Sheik told Albert Anastasia, this kid's an animal, he don't care, he's a killer, he's this, he's that. He robbed the poker games, he's disrespectful, and he was going on and on and on. And Albert Anastasia, my father said, was just sitting there. And then when Tony the Sheik stopped talking, Albert Anastasia just told Tony the Sheik, well, who do you want me to straighten out, priests? And like, that was sort of like the end of the conversation. And then my father got straightened out right after that. And it's funny because I came into play. My father always said that 1953 was the best year of his life because he became a made member of the mob and also a father, because that's the same year I was born. So he became a father and a made member the same year. So, you know, so when I was born, he was already straightened out. He was already a soldier in that family. And then right after I was born, 3 years later, Albert Anastasia was assassinated. And then, you know, my father's regime did all the murders for Albert. And then Carlo Gambino took over and, you know, that crew did all, and then they made Arnel, my father's captain, Dellacroce. And then later on, Arnel Dellacroce became the underboss, and my father and Arnel had a great relationship. You know, so when I was a kid, coming into my life, when I was a kid, like I always knew something was different, but I didn't really know what, because I was a kid. I didn't understand. You know, I knew that, you know, he got treated differently. When he took me with him, he got a lot of respect. People always stuck money in my pocket when he took me to the bar. You know, he always owned bars and restaurants, and we went to Italian restaurants. You know, he got catered to, you know, and so I knew something was going on, like I said, but I didn't know what. You know, he used to tell me he worked in the dry cleaners if the school wanted to know what he did for a living. And I knew that wasn't true, but I said it anyway to my teachers that he worked in the dry cleaners, because he did own one or two of them with this fella, Pacey, you know, so I knew that he owned them, but I knew he didn't work in them because he always left the house in suits and ties, and there was always men in and out of my house. So I didn't find out about him being, you know, in the mob until I branched off my block. Because, you know, in New York at the time, we all stood on our block. We played stickball and all that on our block. But when I was about 13, I branched off the block. I had met some kids in public school. I met some kids in school, and they were hanging out at a pizzeria on 101st Avenue. So I branched off my block, and I went to the pizzeria. And when I started hanging out on this corner, the older kids, when I went to the corner, I would hear them say, "That's Fat Andy's son. That's Fat Andy's son." So Charlie Wagons, I knew, but, you know, and then, so really I found out who my father was through the older kids in the neighborhood. And then I started getting treated a little different, and I liked it. I liked the feeling. And at that point, my father knew I was on the corners, so he started taking me to all the wise guy clubs. They introduced me to them. And that's the first time I met John Gotti. Charlie Wagons had a club, the Bergen Hunt Fish Club in Ozone Park, where we lived. Yep. And my father took me there because now I was roaming around the neighborhood, and he took me there and he told them, "This is my son. If you see him, look out for him." You know, he didn't want me to get hurt if I did anything wrong. They didn't know who I was, and, you know, vice versa, for them to look out for me. So that was my first introduction to wise guys outside of my home.
All right. Now, and I don't want to gloss over this fact either. This picture behind me, I'm sure you recognize it.
Yes. Goodfellas.
Yep. Your father was actually mentioned in Goodfellas, in the scene where they're going around the restaurant and they're naming off all the people, this is Pete the Killer and yada yada. Your father's name is dropped in there. How did that, did you know that was going to be in there when you seen it? Because I'm sure you've seen Goodfellas in the cinema. Did you know that was going to be in there?
No, it's funny because what happened was when the movie, first of all, I knew all the people in the movie. Right. I knew all the characters in the movie. My father was very good friends with all of them, with Paulie Vario. I mean, I used to go in Paulie Vario's house in Canarsie when I was a little kid with my father, so I knew all of them on a personal level. But I didn't know they were going to mention my father's name in the movie, but I knew he knew them all. So I went to the movie theater with all my friends that day or that night, whatever it was. And I remember I was sitting in the row with all my friends, and the movie started and they were panning. That was called the Bamboo Lounge. Right. It was in Canarsie. And they were, which I used to go to with my father, and they were panning that scene. And when they got to my father and they said, Fat Andy, every one of my friends went, "That's your father." Like, and the whole theater heard it, and I'm sitting there like, oh shit. So it was like a big surprise. And my friends, and it was comical because everybody said it at the same time. And my daughter, it's a funny, because years and years later, I was in prison and my daughter was a young kid, and for some reason, her and her cousins watched the movie on video. And when they said my father's name, her cousins all screamed, "That's your grandfather." And my daughter didn't really know what was going on, So that was my intro into Goodfellas. But, it was weird because, I had a personal relationship with mostly every character in the movie. I had a relationship with Tommy DeSimone. He used to take me out drinking with him. Jimmy Burke, I knew. I used to hang out. I actually dated Jimmy Burke's daughter, Kathy, when we were teenagers. I was actually, took her out on dates. I was very good friends with her, with Kathy, his two sons, Jesse and Frank, who we named after Jesse James and Frank James. So I had a relationship with Paulie Vario. Like I said, I used to go in and out of his house when I was a kid with my father. And actually, years later, him and my father and Paulie Vario were in federal prison together in Missouri, in the hospital in the federal. And I used to fly out to Missouri with Pete the Killer and Pete and a lot of wise guys that were around Paulie Vario. So, it was kind of special, the movie, because I actually knew them all on a personal level. Right. But it was a surprise when I heard my father's name being mentioned.
Yeah, and the guy, Tommy DeSimone, who Joe Pesci portrayed, I mean, he played that part great, but there was a noticeable appearance difference, I guess you could say, because Tommy was a big fucking guy. He was huge.
Yeah, he was tall, he was very charismatic. He was a very, very good, sharp dresser, went out with beautiful woman. When he walked in a room, you knew he was in the room. Joe Pesci, like you said, I mean, Joe Pesci won the Academy Award for it. He was great in the movie, but definitely didn't look anything like Tommy at all. Tommy was a killer. Tommy was they were vicious people. I mean, I always had a great time with him, but he was a dangerous person.
Yeah. Fantastic movie all the way around. One of my favorites. It's one of those movies where if I see it on, no matter what part it's at, if it's got, the whole movie left or 10 minutes, I'm going to finish watching it. It's just a great one. So coming in, you decide you want to get into the life. Did your father try to deter you from that or was he kind of just accepting of the fact that, this is the way it is?
No, well, what happened was I got transferred from a Catholic school into a public school. And when I got into public school, it was a different atmosphere. And I started, when I was 13, I started smoking weed in the park. And I became a truant. I started playing hooky and I was running around in the streets because now I knew I was Fat Andy's son. I didn't know everything he was into. Like, I didn't know about the violence. I didn't know about any of the killings yet or anything like that, but I knew he was in organized crime and he was a wise guy. I started learning about the structure of the mob. But when I was 16, I got suspended from high school. I got in trouble and I got suspended and he was not happy. He wanted me, he didn't really want me in the street, but he didn't know, like I said, he never had a father and he didn't really know how to reprimand me or correct me. And he would just come home at night and he would look at me and he would go in his bedroom and watch TV. And he wasn't even talking to me. So after a couple of weeks of giving me the silent treatment, I called up my uncle, his older brother, my Uncle Frank, who him and I had a great relationship. He had no children, so I was like his son. My Uncle Frank, he was like really good to me. And I called up my uncle, who was my father's older brother. There was a big age difference between him and my father. And I said, listen, Uncle Frank, you got to come to the house. You don't want to talk to me. I got suspended from school. So my Uncle Frank came over and we had to sit down in my kitchen, my uncle, my father, and myself. And my uncle told my father, you know, he wants to go to work. He's like us. What are you going to do? So my father said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to work. So my father looked at me, goes, you want to go to work? I'll get you in construction. I'll get you in the bricklayers union. So now back then, the bricklayers union was really big because a lot of things were built with bricks. Today, no more. But back then, that was a really top-notch job, bricklayers. And I said, I don't want to be no bricklayer. He goes, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to work for you. He goes, you want to work for me? And he just sat back and he looked at me. And then he went with his finger, he tapped on the table and he went, well, if you want to go to work for me, remember one thing, going to jail is all part of the fucking job. Now, here I am, I'm 16, getting ready to turn 17. And the way I was raised and the people I was around, like that was okay. You know, that was okay with me. It was normal. And I said, fine. You know, and the next day he took me to this club on Merrick Road in Long Island that this guy, Philly the Pimp, owned. He wasn't really a pimp, but that was his nickname, Philly the Pimp. And he had a blackjack game in there, and I went to work, and that was my first illegal job. I worked in a blackjack game, and then it just progressed. Then I worked in a dice game, and then I worked in a number office. Then I started selling swag, which is stolen property. Right. Then I started selling cigarettes that they were smuggling in from down south, and it just kept on rolling. And, you know, and then I started putting together my own little crew, bringing them around my father. And my father started taking me around with him he took me to the Ravenite. I met Arnel Dellacroce for the first time. And then I became very, very good friends with Arnel's son, Buddy, because we were both around the same age. And him and I got very tight. I met, you know, I got very close to his daughter, Tony, Arnel's daughter. And then it was just like one big family. And I started working for him and I started making big money. You know, now it's the 70s, you know, I'm going in and out of these clubs. I'm getting taken to the Copacabana, you know, and I'm just lost. I'm in it, and it was exciting. And then I started getting arrested, and you know, and then one thing led to another, and then I went to prison for the first time.
So you know, it's interesting to me that a lot of the things the mob did back in the day to make money are legal now. I mean a lot of it. So you guys, you know, ran numbers. And for what people don't know, that was basically a version of the lotto back then that was very popular. A lot of people played it. You guys were loan sharks. You loaned out money for basically people that didn't have credit, you know, to go to the bank. And, you know, now you got cash advance places on every corner. You know, hell, prostitution's legal in some places now. Weed's legal in some places now. Sports betting. All things that you guys were doing back then that they threw you in jail for is legal now. And we both know why. It's because now the government can grab their piece of it. How does that make you feel sitting there now that they tried to throw you in jail for years because of that?
It's crazy. Just the other night, I was in Manhattan and I was having a conversation with some people. And I told them that almost everything I went to prison for today is legal. Bookmaking, shylocking, numbers. So the government took everything from us. And you're right, just because they want their end. You know, it makes me feel not angry, but like it's just, I don't know. I don't think it's right. I mean, you know, you know, they did it. And, you know, and we always knew eventually they were going to steal it from us. We always knew because they always, you know, talked about it and talked about. So I knew it was coming eventually. And a lot of us knew it was coming eventually. But, you know, and they'll still put us in jail. You know, my father told me a long time ago, and I don't want to get political or anything, but my father told me a long time ago that the real mafia was the government. Absolutely. He said they wrote the book. My father was very funny. My father's theory on I'll tell you a little. My father told me my father's theory on the founding fathers were. He said this is one day they were in this pub in Philadelphia, Washington and Adams and Jefferson, and they were drinking. And one of them said to the other one, "Hey, why are we sending this English bastard all this money when we could keep it for ourselves?" And they started a fucking revolution. You know, that was his theory about the government. So, you know, it wasn't a surprise that they did it, but, you know, like I wouldn't even know how to make a living today if I was in the street. Because when I was a kid, to be a bookmaker, you had to get apartments, and now all you got to do is get a website.
Yeah.
And the software does everything for you. And it's funny because I go to New York now. We had a major number business in New York policy, and we had what they call number holes or number spots, and they were mostly bodegas. And in the back room, you would go in the back room and you would play the numbers. And like you said, it was a huge business. I mean, our number business used to gross 90,000, 100,000 a day in business. We didn't win that much money, but that was the gross of how much volume we took in with the numbers. Now you go in a bodega and it's the same setup, but there's a lotto machine there.
Yep.
It's the same setup with a lotto machine. So all the government did was adopt everything from us. You want to make a bet now, you go on an app. And what it's doing is the government is creating gamblers. Yeah. People that would never bet with, there's people out there, legitimate people that would never bet with a guy like me. They would be scared. But now they're all on these apps, making all these $10 parlays or $20. And that's what the government wants. Yeah. $20 parlays, $10 parlays. But these people are losing $400, $500 a month. They don't even realize it.
Yeah, they think because it's at $10 and it's got a 15-leg parlay, you can, hit it for 20, 30 grand. But by the time the odds of hitting one of those are very, very low. We know how the game is played. It's damn near impossible.
They want you to make those kind of bets, them exotic bets. That's what they want.
Yeah.
Like my son, all my son's friends, they're all legitimate kids. That now they all live in New York. Now sports betting's legal in New York. They all downloaded the apps. They're all betting every day, basketball, football, they think it's a game, and it's not a game, but yet I went to jail for it. It's funny. And now today, nobody's going to jail. And I went to jail for writing, and I make a joke of it. I go, look at that, robbing Louis Vuitton stores. They're not, I said, I went to jail for writing a number. I got 4 years writing a number. It's crazy.
It's crazy how these times has changed. Now, around about what time here do you get married? I think this is your first marriage.
Right. So I got married. So I started dating a girl from a neighborhood, Alice Mayoni, who was Happy Mayoni from Murders Incorporated's niece, right. Great niece. So our families knew each other, and I met her in a club, actually. I met her in some club that Jeannie Gotti owned called the Hunka Munka. No, excuse me, it was called the Mr. Colossus. It was in Howard Beach. And Jeannie Gotti owned it. It was like a first disco in my neighborhood. And I met her in there, and our families knew each other. Right. And I started dating her, and we got married in 1977 in October in the La Mira on Ocean Parkway. There was 1,000 people at my wedding. As a matter of fact, if you saw the movie The Irishman, Buffalino, the guy that Joe Pesci played, he was the first guest to come to my wedding that night. He pulled up with a limousine because he was very good friends with my father. So, and I had 1,000 people at my wedding. Paul Castellano was there. That's the first time I met Paul Castellano. And we had a big wedding, and that was the first time I got married. I already had a case pending. I went to trial. I got convicted for a liquor warehouse. We were emptying out a liquor warehouse, and I'd gotten arrested. I was out on an appeal bill, so I got married in October of 77, and then in March of 78, I lost my appeal, and then I went to prison for the first time.
Wow. Yeah, that was actually what I was getting at, was Buffalino being at your wedding, and amongst the other names that you named. That's a powerful guest list you got there, my friend, for sure.
Yeah. So Buffalino, he was out of Pennsylvania, and every Christmas time, we would go to Pennsylvania. He would have a big Christmas party, and we would go to his Christmas. Matter of fact, the last time I went to his Christmas party, Tony Bennett sang at the party.
Wow.
Yeah. So he had a lot of juice. And then and it was funny because at my wedding, the guests didn't arrive yet, and I was standing up on the balcony looking outside, and I saw a limousine pull up, and he got out of the limousine with a few guys, and I ran back inside, and I said, "Listen, Buffalino just showed up." He goes, "He's here already?" And he was like the first person to come to my wedding. And then it's funny, Paul Castellano was there, and he gave me a card with five $100 bills in it, and he signed it, "Love, Paul Castellano." And my father ripped up the card and threw it out because, it had his full name on it,
right.
but we kept the money, and he gave me $500. That was a lot of money in 1977.
Yeah.
So yeah, every family. I mean, I got envelopes from Chicago, from Buffalo. You know, Joe Tadera, he was the boss of Buffalo. He was good friends with my father. He sent me an envelope. Guys from Chicago sent me an envelope. My father knew a couple of guys in New Orleans. They were in the construction business. He used to meet them once in a while in Miami. They sent me envelopes. Yeah, it was just amazing.
Okay. Now you mentioned you're about to go away on your first pinch here. Your father actually kind of gave you like a going away party, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
Or going inside party, I guess you could call it.
So I got the, you know, I lost my appeal and I got a date to surrender. So a couple of days before I had to surrender myself, my father, they had a going away party for me in Manhattan. So him and I got dressed up, suits and ties, and he took me to Manhattan. Actually, it was in the Ravenite, to tell you the truth. That's where it was. It was in the Ravenite. And I walked in and everybody was there. I mean, it was mobbed and had a big spread of food. It was like I was going off to Harvard. It was like a big party. Like I'm going to fucking jail, and you know, we're celebrating that I'm going to jail. Like it's crazy. You know, when I think, you know, back then I loved it, but now when I sit here and I think about it, how crazy is that? Here I am, I'm 23 years old. I just got married and I'm going to jail and we're having a party like it's New Year's Eve, you know, and all the old men are there and they're patting me on the back and telling me how to behave in jail. If anybody mentions our names, don't talk to them till we check them out. A lot of people are going to want to be your friends because of your father, you know, and that school, Arnel was there. He was hugging me and kissing me, Arnel Dellacroce. Right. You know, it was just, yeah, we were there all day partying and, you know, and then you know, a few days later, I surrendered myself and I went to prison for 2.5 years.
Well, you remember when your father told you it's part of the life.
Yeah, part of the life, part of the job, you know, and I went to prison and I did 2.5 years. I got out in 80, you know, and I went right back to the street. My father at that time now was going back and forth to Florida from Miami to New York. We were bouncing back and forth. He had opened up an Italian restaurant in North Miami. So we were going back and forth from New York to Florida and back. And then, you know, that's when John started making his move. John Gotti
that was what I was going to talk to you about. Yeah. So what was kind of the landscape? So Paul was still in power, but John Gotti started putting together his power move to take over.
Well, so what happened was they were all in the same regime. You know, it's funny, you know, to backtrack for a minute. Charlie Wagnons actually straightened out John Gotti and my father. He proposed both of them. Wow. Of course, John, he proposed later on in the 70s, my father in the 50s, but they both got straightened out by the same guy, Charlie, and Jeannie Gotti and Angela. They all got straightened out by the same guy, by Charlie. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my father was always good friends with John. You know, I always knew John. John always looked out for me, always helped me from the day I met him. You know, and whenever I went to him for anything, he you know, helped me. So my father had got so we were going back and forth. Every time my father was in New York, he would hang out with John. They would go out, you know, we would go to Peter Luger's together. We'd go hang out at Richie Gotti's cafe at night. So they had a really good relationship. Paul was still the boss. And then, you know, a lot of guys were selling heroin on the down low. My father, he never was in the heroin business. And I used to fight with him. Matter of fact, you know, it was crazy because we had a bar in Brooklyn and guys used to bring my father like a kilo of heroin. Like say, here, Andy, you want to make some money? And he would go, I don't sell that. Like they would owe him a favor and they would offer him heroin. And he would say, I don't want that shit. And I used to tell him, take the fucking heroin. And he used to tell me, it's blood money. He considered, here he is, he's a killer. And he's telling me selling heroin was blood money. Yeah. So he would tell the guy that offered him the heroin, no, take me to Murray's clothing store, buy me some suits and take me out for dinner. That was his payment for whatever favor he did for them. But everybody else was selling junk, you know, on the down low.
Oh, yeah.
And as the story goes, so then my father, he was doing stuff in Florida and he was doing stuff in New York. Matter of fact, he had a gold store in New York, and getting back to the Goodfellas, he actually fenced all the jewelry from Lufthansa. Because he was good friends with them. They brought him the jewelry from Lufthansa and he sold it with his partner, Tony Lee, through his gold store. He had a gold and silver exchange, my father, back in the day. So they were going back and forth, and then my father got arrested. He got indicted in Florida. He got arrested, and he was fighting his case, and that's when Paul Castellano got assassinated.
Now you were out. You were on the street when that happened.
Yeah, it's funny because I was home the day it happened. I was home, and I was sitting in my living room watching TV, and a bulletin came on the TV like Paul Castellano was just gunned down in Midtown Manhattan. I jumped up off the couch and I ran into the kitchen. I picked up the phone and I called up my father's partner, Tony Lee, and I go, they just clipped Paul. And he was like, so casual. Yeah, I know. And I realized that he knew.
Oh, yeah. Because
he was very tight with you. And when the way he said it to me, like I hung up the phone, I go, oh shit, they knew. And then I didn't put it all together yet, but I knew something was up. Right. And then the next day I found out what happened, because what happened was about 2 or 3 days later, John became the boss.
Right.
And was official. He became the boss, and they had meetings. Tony Lee's mother lived in Ozone Park, and she had a house, and they actually had meetings in her basement to put together the family. And then we all went to the Ravenite to pay John homage, I guess you could say. And then a week or two later, he had this big Christmas party in this place called the El Carib in Brooklyn. And that was like his coming out party as the boss. And we all went to this big Christmas party he had. So, that's when he became the boss. And, and my father was in prison. We went up to the prison, Tony Lee and I, and we told my father what happened. And he was impressed. He goes, is this the same John Gotti we know? He was, and Tony goes, yeah, it's the same John Gotti we know, because they knew him since he was a kid. And he was impressed with the whole hit, how it went down in Manhattan.
Now, a lot of people, that's not something that just happens every day, killing a boss like that, especially one of the Gambinos, because that's, at that time, I'm sure probably the largest crime family in, or at least one of them in the world. Did he get permission from the other families? I mean, I know that's kind of been debated throughout documentaries and series and movies where a lot of people were okay with it, but some weren't. I know that kind of started a war with the Chin's family and, Anthony Casso. Do you know of any, did he actually seek permission to do that? Or did he kind of act on his own? And, because I know Paul wasn't exactly the most respected gangster when it came to street shit. He was really good at the business aspect. He wanted to turn more or less kind of get the mob in more legitimate businesses from what I know.
Yeah. So my understanding of the whole thing, what Tony Lee told me and what I heard, from other people. So he didn't have permission from the commission, but what he did have was the okay from 2 of the 5, his family, the people he was conspiring with, like Sammy and Frankie DeChico. They were powerful captains in the Gambino families, so they were with him. But as far as the other families go, like the Bananas, they're okay because he was very tight with Joe Messina, who was their boss. They helped Joe Messina become the boss, the Gambino family. So he had that family. And from what I understand, the Colombos, they sort of said, okay.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But the Lucchese family and the Genovese family, I don't even think they knew what was going on. Because after John became the boss, you got to remember, that's when, right after John became the boss, Frankie DeChico got blown up.
Yeah. Yep.
Bobby Burriello got killed in his driveway. Eddie Lino, who was a very, very good friend of mine, I used to go to Yankee games with him. They killed him on the Bell Parkway, getting off the exit. And later on, we found out who killed them. The Genovese family blew Frankie DeChico up. Mm-hmm. The Lucchese family had Eddie Lino killed by the mob cops and Bobby Burriello killed. So that was retaliation for Paul because he, of what John did. But eventually, John just straightened everything out. The FBI, even at one point, had to notify John that the Genovese family were plotting to kill him because they picked it up on a wiretap. They had to actually notify him that he was, they had a contract out on him. But eventually he straightened it all out. So, but people did lose their lives, unfortunately, after Paul got assassinated.
Yeah, those mafia cops. That's what Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa. I think they have a show coming out about them pretty soon. So that'll be interesting to see how true that is.
Yeah, especially, and he's the one that played my father in Goodfellas.
I was about to say that. I thought that was him that played it. Yeah, because he had that little short stint. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So going forward here a little bit later, you get picked up a couple of times. You had to do a number of stretches in prison, but unfortunately, during one of those stretches, your father passed away. Is that correct?
Yeah. So like I said, I went to prison the first time in 78. And then in 1989, I got arrested again for in running my father's number office, the number ring. I got arrested in 89, in December of 89, and I got re-indicted again in March of 90. I went to prison again in 91 for 16 months. I got out of prison. When I was in prison at that time, John Gotti had gotten arrested with Sammy.
Right.
And Frankie Lope. When I was in prison in 91, and that's when Sammy started cooperating. Mm-hmm. So when I got out in 92, John was off the street. Right. I was home until in 96, I got indicted for bookmaking. Here we go. I got indicted on a big bookmaking case. It was a big Queens and Brooklyn. The Organized Crime Task Force indicted us. The state indicted us. And I took a plea. I got a 2-4 for bookmaking. And while I was in state prison, I got indicted in Broward County by the feds on a RICO case with Nicky Carrazza, who was the acting boss for John Gotti at the time, and a couple of wise guys and myself. And I got indicted in Miami. The marshals took me to extradited me to Miami, and I wound up getting 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So now I finished my state time. I went to federal prison, and in March 19th of in March, when I was in federal prison, my father passed away. He passed away March 19th of 99. And while I was in federal prison.
And they wouldn't let you out to go to it?
Well, no. What happened was the warden first, it's like a process in federal prison. It's much easier. And so first you have to apply to the warden. It's really, for most inmates, it's up to the warden, but for some reason, for organized crime inmates or high profile, it has to go through Washington. So the warden okayed it for me to go, but he had to get the okay from Washington, and somebody in Washington denied me. They wouldn't let me go to his funeral, and I never went to his funeral. No, I never went.
So when you get out of that one, about how many years total have you done in prison?
Total, I did about 14 years total. That one I did 8 years and 3 months.
Okay, so at what point there's a murder that is, what is it, your brother-in-law or what was
it?
Yeah,
my brother-in-law, 1988.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that and how that went down and the repercussions of that, because when those charges come back, that's when things kind of, you have to make some life-changing decisions. Tell us a little bit about that murder and how it took place.
So my sister married this fellow named Frankie, who was a very dangerous person. He was an armored truck robber. He was a killer. He was just a dangerous kid. He was a very dangerous kid. And for some reason, he started abusing my mother. And on one evening, he actually beat her up. He choked her. And my ex-wife, my first wife, had to break it up because I was actually in treatment when it happened, because I had a cocaine issue and I was addressing it. I was in treatment. And when I got out of treatment, I went to my father's partner and I told him what was going on. He said he already knew. And I said, well, what are we going to do about it? He goes, we're going to kill him. And then we started planning to kill him. We started plotting to how we were going to do it. We sent word to John Gotti because we had to get a permission, because it's crazy in the mob. You need permission to kill somebody, you know.
Yeah.
So we sent a message through Jeannie Gotti to John Gotti, who loved my mother. John loved my mother, like forget it. So he, of course, gave us the okay, and then we started planning it. And then we got him. We told him, we gave him some kind of bullshit story that we had a score for him, and I picked him up at his house, and I drove him to a club, a social club we had, and I walked him in, and he was executed.
All right. Now, when did the charges come down for that?
So that happened in June, I believe, of '88. So I went to prison the last time in '96. I got out in August of '04. I got out in August of '04, and in June of '05, I was sitting in front of my son's house on a bench, and I was leaning back with my eyes closed, taking the sun, waiting for my son to come home because we had to go to a wedding that night. And all of a sudden I hear, "Don't move, you mother effer, don't move." And I opened up my eyes and it was a gun right in my nose. And I was surrounded by FBI agents, and they scooped me up off the bench and they handcuffed me and they threw me in a van, and they charged me with that homicide, with that murder.
So that's kind of like how he says it in Goodfellas. You knew it probably had to be the cops, because if it had been a wise guy, you wouldn't have heard nothing.
Yeah, I would have been dead, right? Yeah. When I opened up my eyes, he was standing right in front of me like this, the FBI agent, FBI. And the guy behind me was screaming, "FBI, FBI. You have any weapons on you?" I remember they were screaming, "Do you have any weapons on you?" And then they just yoked me off the bench and they cuffed me and they threw me into this van and they were screaming at me, "You fucking murderer. We got you now." And they was, all that BS. And then they took me and they charged me with the murder with a RICO, murder, bookmaking, a whole bunch of charges. I got out. I got out 2 weeks later on a $3 million bond. I got out of prison with an ankle monitor, and and then at that point I was sort of turned off with the life. My father was dead at this point. Tony Lee was dead at this point. John Gotti was dead. So the three main guys in my life that looked out for me, that I respected, were gone. Mm-hmm. John Gotti, my father, who loved me more than anything. Tony Lee, his partner, I was like his son. The guy paid for my treatment out of his pocket. John Gotti did everything. When I got out of treatment in 1988, John Gotti bought me a car. I had no car. He bought me a car. He gave me $2,000. I mean, the guy always looked out for me. So they were gone. I got my first legitimate job when I got out. I never had a legitimate job. I got my first legitimate job driving a truck. I loved it. I said, "Oh my God, I should have done this 30 years ago." And then I got arrested, and then I got arrested. And when I got arrested, nobody wanted to help. Nobody wanted to help. I needed money for attorneys. I couldn't get any money. The people, the class of people that were in the mob weren't the same as my father. My father would have done anything to help you. They were sending me messages, "You made your own bed, now sleep in it." And then my co-defendant was planning his alibi without me.
Wow.
And I'm going, "What's going on here?" So for some reason, I kept this FBI agent's card. He gave me this card, this guy, Jerry Conrad. He was an FBI agent. And I never kept their cards. I always used to throw them out. But for some reason, I kept his card. I don't know why. I guess it was divine intervention. But I couldn't make the call. I would pick up the phone and I would hang it up. I would pick up the phone because it went against everything I believed in. It went against the fabric of my life.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew my father hated people that cooperated, And I picked up the phone and I hung it up. I picked up the phone and I hung it up. I couldn't do it. One day I went by this guy's house. I had a pass to go. I used to be able to leave my house for certain times of the day to go see my lawyer, to go to the dentist, whatever. So I got a pass that day to go out. And I went to this knockaround guy's house. I don't want to mention his name. He's still out there. And we were in his basement. And he says to me, "Why don't you call the government?" I said, "Call the government? Are you fucking crazy? I can't do that. I can't do it." I said, "I can't disrespect my father like that." I was kind of even surprised he talked to me like that. He says, "Listen," he goes, "you did everything your father ever asked you. You killed somebody for your father," because he okayed my brother-in-law get killed. He said, you went to jail for your father. You respected your father when he was alive. Your father's dead." He said, you can't disrespect the father. He's dead. But I still couldn't make the call. Then what happened was I had something legal going on and I needed, so I contacted an attorney that was good friends of my father's and myself, who was a mob attorney. And I contacted this attorney to help me, and they agreed. A couple of days later, I get a call from this attorney, and they go, "Listen, I spoke to your co-defendant's attorneys, and they don't want to help you. They don't want to give me the information I need because they're going to use it." It was for a motion for me, but they had to use it at trial, but I could have used it in a motion to help me get the whole case dismissed, and they didn't want to give it to me. So this attorney turns around and tells me, "Listen, I'm going to tell you something because I love you and I loved your father. He was good to me. These people are going to throw you under the bus. you need to call the government. Now this is from an attorney, a mob attorney. So I hang up the phone. I still couldn't make the call. Still couldn't do it. The next morning I woke up and my wife was leaving to go to work, and I took the card. And I told my wife, listen, when you get to work, call this number and tell this guy to come see me. I couldn't call on my own. So she left. She made the call, and that afternoon, the 2 FBI agents came to my house, and I cooperated.
So that, like you said, that had to be a hard decision to make, being brought up how you were brought up by your father and being around guys like John Gotti, because I'm sure John could have talked when he went in and told some stuff to maybe make things easier on himself, but there wasn't no way in hell that man was going to say a damn thing.
No, it was the hardest thing I ever did, but, I know in my heart, like right now, when I'm sitting here right now and I'm thinking about it, I know in my heart, if my father was alive, or Tony Lee was alive, or John was alive, there's no way I would have done it. I would have never gave any of them up.
Right, that was going to be my question.
I would have never gave my father up. Never in a million years. I would have never gave none of them up. Them 3 guys, they were like the holy grail to me. I would have never gave them up. So that sort of it makes me, I'm okay looking in the mirror at myself, because I know in my heart I would have never gave them up if they were alive. I would have went down with the ship. But they weren't alive, and the guys that were out there weren't worth it. Right. When my father died, I'm in prison. They took everything. Mm-hmm. They took everything from my family. My mother had to get Meals on Wheels. Now here's Fat Andy's wife they left her with no money. They took everything. I had a guy paying my son's health insurance. They told the guy to bring them the money. So there was no loyalty no more. There was no, it wasn't like it. The mob wasn't the same as it was when I first came around in the early 70s. The clientele, the members, it was just a different world. And it wasn't, and it just turned me off. So, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I miss being in the mob. I miss the action. I miss the money. I miss, not waiting on lines. I miss sitting in the front row, but them days are over, and now I'm just content, like I tell people, they go, what's the difference between now and then? The difference between now and then is I'm content now. Back then, I was never content. It was always about more. Yep. More, the next scheme, the next robbery, the next this, the next game, the next girl. It was just about, more and more. Now I sit down and I'm content.
So after you cooperated, did they put you in a program? How did that work?
So when I first cooperated, they took me out of my house. They put me in a safe house for a while. Then I went to another state to live. They relocated my wife at the time and my daughter, to the state I was in. Then I went into the witness protection program on my own, and I went out west, and they changed my name. They gave me all my new identification. I was in that program for a little over a year, and I signed myself out on good terms. And I went back under the protection of the umbrella of the FBI, and they moved me back to where my wife and my daughter was at the time, and they supplemented my income. And I testified at 6 trials.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're out of the protection or witness protection, they're not looking out for you anymore. Did you have any fear of retribution or, from the,
I don't really, it's not fear. I was careful, like the FBI had, like they know everything. They have more informants out there running around in the streets, and everybody's the surveillance is so massive, so they were pretty much, they were pretty much on it. Like they had their finger on a lot of stuff. So they sort of knew what was going on. And I was never really in any danger. When I came into New York, I was always well protected by them. So I wasn't in fear, but I was careful. I'm careful. Are there people out there that are capable of killing me? Of course there are. But who's going to send them?
Yeah. Yeah. You make good points, man. Because the mob, like we said earlier, is nowhere near what it was like, back when you were coming up and your father was coming up. It's a different breed of guys altogether. The older regime are gone. And like you said, that whole, when it was, I guess I could use the word fun. When it was fun to be a mobster, that was kind of your heyday. Nowadays, I don't think it's fun.
No, It's not. It's not fun. No, it was a lot of fun. Listen, you know, like you want to get back to Goodfellas like that. Like I used to get into the Copacabana through the basement up through the kitchen, you know, like to see, you know, like that's how we got in when, you know, when there was big crowds, that's how we got in. You know, it was an exciting time. You know, I hung out with all these celebrities. I used to hang out at this club called the Ritz in now it's Webster Hall. It was a rock club, you know, and I sat down at the table with like Andy Warhol and all these big celebrities and drank with them and partied with them. You know, it was just an exciting time. And, you know, and then it wasn't, you know, then it wasn't.
Yeah, Frank Sinatra, you dealt with Frank a little bit too.
Yeah, my father was friends with, my father used to drink with Frank Sinatra and Jilly's. My father was friends with De Niro because even, you know, De Niro denies being friends with him, but they were friends. There's pictures, you know, photographic proof, but he denies it. I don't know why, but, you know, yeah, my father was great friends with Frankie Valli. He was in and out of my house. He would walk in my house and Frankie Valli would be sitting there eating macaronis in my house. Jay Black from Jay and the Americans was like my father's son. Yeah, you know, and I was around all these people, you know, since I was a kid.
Wow, well, that's quite a story, man. Now that you're out, what have you been up to lately? You're doing some counseling, is that correct?
Yeah. So what happened was when I got out of the witness protection program, a friend of mine that was in the drug treatment business, he was a supervisor. He gave me a call one day and he goes, "Listen, I was talking to the owner of the treatment center I work for, and I told him your story and he wants to offer you a job as a counselor. He thinks your life experience, you could help like kids, you know?" So he says, "But you have to go back to school." I said, "I got to go back to school, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Listen, the company will pay for the school, come down and, you know, go to work." So I decided to do that. I decided to do it. I moved to the state that the place was in. I went to work in the treatment center. I went to school to get certified as a certified addiction counselor, and I became a counselor. And I've been doing that now, going on 8 years, almost. Yeah, going on 8 years. I was a behavioral health technician. I was a counselor. I was a case manager because I was involved in recovery since 1988 on my own. You know, I've been going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings for, I'm clean 33 years.
That's good.
I had 33 years on January 12th. So, yeah, that's what I do. So I work in a treatment center and, you know, now I'm doing all this other stuff I'm trying to get my story out there, you know, see what happens. Maybe help somebody, help myself along the way. So things are, you know, moving forward.
Now you actually run a class. It's called Mafia Masterclass. Is that correct?
Right. Mafia Masterclass. Yes.
Okay. So if anybody wants to go check that out, it's mafiamasterclass.com.
Right. Yeah. And they could also go on my website, anthonyruggiano.com, and there's a link on that too. Plus, there's a lot of other information on my website, what's going on in the future, what I'm involved in. And so, yeah, check out the website, anthonyruggiano.com.
Okay. Yeah. If you guys are interested in that, you know, go take the class. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of information. You know, you're going to get some information from this episode, but I'm sure a lot more one-on-one with him. Well, before we break this down, I've got one question that I've kind of asked people throughout the years and debated. And since you were in the Gambinos, you were there firsthand. When Carlo died, right, everybody or most people assumed he was going to name Neil as his successor. But he kind of surprised some people and he put Paul in there. And like we spoke earlier, he was more of a businessman. Do you think the mob would have been better had Neil took over? Do you think it would have been better had John stayed in line and let Paul keep running the family? Or do you think it probably worked out better with John doing what he did in the direction it went? Because I think ultimately it would have come to an end. We would be where we are now, no matter who was in charge. It's just the times changed. But how do you think the family would have been run better between those three guys?
That's a great question, because when Carl Gambino died in the 70s, my father went to his funeral, of course, and everybody assumed Neil was going to become the boss because he was the underboss.
Right.
But Carl, before he died, he named Paul. My father and John Gotti and all of them wanted Neil to declare himself the boss, even though Gambino named Paul as his successor. Neil had the power and the guys with him, the killers, to just declare himself the boss. Nobody would have said nobody would have bucked him. He could have declared himself the boss. He didn't. He was old school, Costa Nostra. The boss is the, you know, like Tony Lee used to tell me, the boss is the boss is the boss. And, you know, he respected Gambino's wishes on his deathbed to make Paul the boss. Right. So that's why Neil took a back seat. Was everybody around Neil happy? No, they all wanted Neil to be the boss. I think if Neil would have became the boss, it would have been a much better situation. Moving forward, now Paul's the boss, Neil gets cancer, and he dies. While Neil was dying, Jeannie Gotti and Angelo get arrested for heroin, right? Which was a big no-no with Paul. Yeah. Paul wants the tapes. They can't give Paul the tapes because they're going to get killed.
Yeah, they're going to be on him.
Right. So moving forward, so now Neil dies of stomach cancer. Now I'm around when all this is going on. I went to Neil's funeral, and Paul doesn't show up at Neil's funeral. So that's like a blatant message to John, because now John's getting treated already like the boss at Neil's funeral. Paul don't show up at the funeral. Now he wants the tapes. They're not going to give him the tapes. It's kill or be killed. And then, Paul got assassinated and John became the boss. Was John a good boss? I mean, he was good to me. I mean, did he put us all on kind of Front Street? Definitely. He definitely wasn't old school. He was on the front cover of Time magazine. He was in all the newspapers. He was like a big celebrity. People were asking him for his autograph. So in the long run, I mean, when I think about it now, would it have been better if Neil became the boss? Yeah, it probably would have been. It would have been different. John still may become the boss at some point, but it didn't work out that way.
Well, I think that about wraps it up, man. Look, I've had a great time going down through your story, asking some questions from questions I've always wondered, but asking them from somebody that was there, that knew all these guys firsthand. And I hope you enjoyed it as well. I hope our listeners enjoyed it. Like we said, mafiamasterclass.com. Go check that out. I'm sure it'll be a great time. We'll put a link to it in our on our description on our post when we post this on the YouTube channel. Anthony, we wish you nothing but the best going forward, my friend. I hope everything goes well for you. I hope you get more of your story out there. I think a movie would probably be in your lineup someday soon, hopefully.
I hope so. I would love it. Thanks. It was a pleasure. I had a great time. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was Anthony Ruggiano Jr. I am Hollywood Wade, and unfortunately, we are out of time. Tune in next week for an all-new episode here on Crime and Entertainment. Andy, we appreciate it, my friend.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.